Well, I'd like to read you from Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I'll store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you've plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you prepared for yourself? This is how it will be for anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich towards God." I don't know what's wrong with me, but I find myself constantly reading the most ridiculous, inane things. I do hope you spend your reading time better than I do. Here, for example, is a list of lost property that I read recently, and it was stuff that was handed in at British Rail depots last year, and at the top of the list, to my astonishment, was a human brain, which was apparently left by a medical student on an away day. I don't know what you'd call that, but it might be the ultimate in absent-mindedness, I'm not sure. It makes interesting reading this list. The other things on it include a pair of stuffed gerbils, a glass eye, a motorcycle and a wooden leg, and the mind boggles as to whether the same person left them all behind. Well, by contrast, I'd very much like you to use your brains now, ladies and gentlemen, and I wonder if you'd do a small exercise for me. Henry Ford said, "Thinking is probably the hardest work there is, which is the probable reason why so few of us engage in it." But could you put your mind to this question? Do you think that you're a successful person? Do you think you're a successful person? And I'm not saying have you been in the past or do you think you will be, but right now, at this point in time, would you consider yourself to be successful? And I suppose as I say that, there'd be a pretty fair range. There'd be some who'd say, well, look, I'm pretty sure I am successful. There'd be others who've been put down so often they'd say, well, look, I just don't think I am. And I guess most of us would be mucking around somewhere in the middle. But the question is, what would constitute success as far as you're concerned? Well, there comes before us in the Bible today a man who from every point of view would have been considered successful, and yet God's judgment on him was that he was a dismal failure. A dismal failure. So God writes his obituary, and it's very small and short, and it's there in verse 20. I wonder if you can see it. Verse 20, "But God said to him, 'You fool.'" Here is the funeral card of my best friend from university. He was a wonderful guy, a guy called Harry. And I went to his graveside about 18 months ago as his father. I took his funeral, and I went to the graveside with his dad. And his father, weeping by his son's graveside, pointed at the headstone and said, "I don't know what to write on my son's grave. What epitaph shall I put on his headstone?" It was a terrible moment. Well, God writes this man's epitaph. Can you see it there in verse 20, "You fool"? And interestingly, in the Greek, the word Jesus uses for fool literally means without thought. Without using your brain. It's not that he didn't think, he did. He made plans, he sat down, he thought and thought and thought. His mind time was absolutely full. There was no bandwidth left. But he didn't think about the right things. He didn't think about the really important things in life. So let's just think about the dividing things that constitute success and failure in this passage. It is a striking passage, then it had to be. Because right through chapter 12, Jesus has been talking about the things of eternity, the things of God. People should be riveted. My godfather was killed on the 6th of August, 1982, and I remember I began to think about eternity on that day. I remember thinking, what happened to him? Well, this is about eternity. Verse 2, he says, actually, we're a bit like Maximus in the film Gladiator. What we do in life echoes in eternity. There's nothing concealed that won't be disclosed. Verse 5, this is pretty striking. "Fear him who after the killing of the body has power to throw you into hell." That's about eternity. Verse 8, we're warned that eternity, the future, belongs to this figure, the Son of Man. And then suddenly, bang! There's a massive interruption. And a guy in the crowd shouts, can you see verse 13? "Just tell my stupid brother, my wretched brother, to divide the inheritance with me." So there's a guy there, and he says, "I don't care about these super spiritual stuff. That doesn't put bread on the table. Tell my wretched brother," I put that word in, but it's what he means, "to divide the inheritance with me." So here are two brothers falling out for good over money. Their relationship's coming to an end over who's going to get their grandmother's sideboard and clock. I've got a colleague, and during the funeral, one of the children removed from the parental home what they wanted. Can I tell you not to do that? If I'd advise you not to. It annoys people. But that's what happened at that funeral. And this man is absorbed by possessions. He can't be doing with Jesus' teaching. And Jesus, having been so rudely interrupted, then says, verse 15, watch out! A man's life doesn't consist of the abundance of his possessions. And then he arrests us with this parable to make this very angry guy who's got a writ in his own pocket to go and serve against his own brother, put it back and step back and think, oh, what's important? What's really important in life? So we read verse 16. Let's have a look down. Do we see? We learn there that the ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. So this guy knows exactly how to work the EU subsidies. The stables have been converted into garages. There are 4 family cars. In city terms, he's one of thousands who commutes in, perhaps from Surrey, lives on the Wentworth estate. He's got a lovely townhouse in Mayfair too, sometimes stays there. I don't know, where would the kids be at school? I guess the girls would be at Down House, the boys would be at Harrow or Eton. And he'd be a member of Sunningdale and perhaps Wentworth as well. And doubtless if you saw him commuting in, perhaps from Sunningdale Station, you'd nudge your neighbour and say, look at him. He's made a fortune, you know. Take his advice. He's no fool. Verse 17, 18, he thought to himself, what shall I do? I've no place to store my crops. Verse 18, then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I'll store all my grain and my goods. So you see, he gets a better harvest than is expected one year, but there's no panic, there's no waste. He's not going to flood the market. He gets out his calculator, he does his sums, and he works out exactly the right course of action. It's definitely paying for a massive grain storage mountain. That's what he's going to do. Waste not, want not. That's what his mum taught him. So there's a bigger profit this year, and he's not going to let Gordon Brown get his hands on it. So he calls in his accountant, he works out how to invest it, and then, having planned and worked and thought and planned and worked and thought, he's at last able to arrive at verse 19. Verse 19, can you see it? And I'll say to myself, you've plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. So it's wonderful. He retires early at 47, and doubtless the Sunday Times colour supplement would do an article on him entitled, The Man Who Knew When to Stop. And all these people leafing through it, stuck in suburbia, still hammering up in the rat race, would read it and say, oh, what a wise man. Very, very wise. Retired early, he did it. And we now know he's a member of 2 golf clubs. He's a member of Sunningdale, but he's also a member down at Royal St George's. And he intends to get his handicap down to single figures at both clubs. So I wonder if you can imagine the scene with verse 20. You see the retirement party's come and gone. He's built himself a lovely house down at Royal St George's at Sandwich, overlooking the bay. And he's standing there with a long, cool glass of what you think orange juice in his hand. And he's looking out at his yacht. And his friends, well, they're all having to hammer back up to the city to keep working. And he's standing there, it's a Sunday afternoon, and he looks down to the little side table, and there are brochures, and there are safaris and skiing holidays. And he's decided he's going to buy a chalet in Courchevel. Because with global warming, you never know when the snow's going to come or not. He'll buy one so he can go when he wants. And the safaris. And he says to himself as he looks back at his house, and he sees his yacht in the bay, and he looks across to Royal St George's, and he says to himself as he looks down at that little table and sees the holidays and sees the safaris, he says, you've done it! You've done it! You've retired early, you've plenty laid up for years and years, take life easy, eat, drink, and suddenly there is a searing pain in his chest, and he's dead before they get him to intensive care. Verse 20, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who'll get what you've prepared for yourself? Well, they hold a memorial service for him in some church in the city, and doubtless the chairman will say what a loyal servant of the company he was. The trade journal will say what an example he was to his profession. But God will say to him, you fool. And I've taken funerals of people like this. My godfather died 6th of August 1982. He was a little like this. And one lady said to me at a funeral, an old lady, she said, Rico, do you know what failure is? And I said, oh, no, I don't know. She said, let me tell you what failure is. Failure is being successful at the things that don't matter. Failure is being successful at the things that don't matter. Well, where did all the money go? Well, mostly it was lost. The lawyers tidied up some of it. The rest of it actually went to a son who blew it all windsurfing. Now, that's what happened to all he prepared to himself. Broke his mother's heart, this boy. Nothing wrong with windsurfing, it's all he did. And what about the eternal world? Well, the eternal world, all was lost. There was nothing but poverty. And what do you think? Do you reckon it would have stopped the brothers with the writs in their pocket? Do you reckon it would have stopped them? Verse 13. Do you reckon it might have made him think about it? I think so. And I want to just close and say this guy made 2 fatal mistakes in life. And as I hold out these mistakes to you, I hope it'll make us think about what success and failure is in life. But his 2 fatal mistakes were as follow. Number 1, he lived as though God wasn't there. Now, we don't know much about this guy. We don't know if he was a good husband or a philanderer. We don't know if he was a good father or beat his children. All we know is, end of verse 21, he was not rich towards God. Now, I don't doubt for a single moment that if you stopped him on the street with a vox pop and said, do you believe in God? He said, yes, of course I do. Of course I believe in him. But he lived as though God wasn't there. And actually, he was utterly self-centered. You see the words I, me, or myself come 11 times in verses 17 to 19. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I've no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build big ones, and there I'll store all my grain and my goods, and I'll say to myself. He thought he was self-sufficient. Actually, he was utterly self-centered. Samuel Butler wrote about 2 incredibly selfish people. Mr. and Mrs. Carlyle, he wrote this: how good of God to cause Carlyle and Mrs. Carlyle to marry one another and so make 2 people miserable instead of 4. He's self-centered. Everything's directed towards himself. So he's got treasure, plenty of good things, verse 19. He's got leisure, take life easy. He's got pleasure, eat, drink and be merry. But God, the giver of it all, well, God's on the back burner. That's where he is. And actually, this is sexist. Forgive me, ladies, this is sexist. I think he'd have said, religion? Really? It's for the wife and children. That's who it's for. I guess one day he'd want to investigate these things, but they'd need a handrail for life. But I really don't. I mean, look at me. Look at my house at St. George's. Look what I did in the city. I don't need God. But actually, you see, the issue is that God is there and he's shown himself. So he says, this is my son, Jesus Christ. What do you make of him? In the Sermon on the Mount, he said, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. As he was being judicially murdered, he cried out for those killing him, Father, forgive them, they know what they do. And God says, here is my son, and success or failure in life depends on what you do with him. And furthermore, he didn't just send him to meet us, he sent him to die on the cross, so for all the times we've slapped God in the face, we can be forgiven. And yet it's amazing that people say, I don't need that. God will accept me because I've lived a decent life. Well, if living a decent life is good enough, why did God send his son to die? Are you honestly saying you can get through death, you can find your way to heaven, and you can get yourself accepted by God on your own when he sent his son to die? So he lived as though God wasn't there, and God says, here is my son to meet you. And secondly, he lived as though there was no judgment. He had a framework for living that did not include, can we see as we look down, verse 20, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. And it's a great thing there's a judgment to come, because it means how I treat you matters to God, how you treat me matters to God, how we treat the world matters to God. But this man lived as though there was no judgment, and God declares him a fool. And he doesn't want to do that. He wants to be as central to our lives as a ball is to a game, and that's why he sent the Lord Jesus Christ to die. To die on Good Friday so we could be forgiven and so that we could know him. And my question to you is God as central to your life as a ball is to a game? Here's a man who God declares a fool because he achieved all he achieved, but he ignored the Lord Jesus Christ. And what we've got to remember is this: failure is being successful at the things that don't matter.